Hello friends, hope everybody's doing well today. So I've got this nice desert scene that I'm going to paint. We've got these beautiful saguaro cactus in this kind of rock outcropping. Got some nice palo verde trees here and there, and a kind of washed out blue sky. And there's a lot of really subtle colors going on in the rocks that I really like. There's some oranges and reds and other things going on in there that I'm going to try to portray. So let's get into the value study so we can see how I broke this scene down. I always do value studies for most of my paintings. It's a great way to simplify the scene into something that's a lot more approachable and understandable for myself. And you can see that with the middle value color, I've created one big shape which is all basically connected, and that creates a very powerful, compelling composition if it's just one big simple shape with all of the middle value colors. And then within the middle value color, I can add darks to create greater contrast and to emphasize certain areas. So you can see the cactus down into the shadows, this palo verde tree here, the shadows of these rocks down here, up into this cactus, and then these rocks, and then out into all the stuff going on in the bottom left is all middle value. And then the shadow side of the cactus, some of the shadows in these rock outcrops and the shadow of this cactus are going to be dark value. So now I have a guide and a roadmap that I can follow for the painting itself. It takes so much of a guesswork out of doing this. If I were to just try to dive into the watercolor painting straight away without doing this value study, I would get pretty overwhelmed, especially with a scene like this where there's a lot of different shapes and things going on. So the value study lets me practice the painting ahead of time, quite literally, because I painted this in just Payne's gray. So very, very useful tool to have. So first thing is first, as always, I'm going to wet both sides of my paper down with the sponge so that it lays nice and flat, and so that the paper will stay wet for longer and give me more time to work wet into wet, especially in that first wash. Okay, so I'm going to start mixing up some colors for the sky, and I'm going to paint right through the saguaro cactus. I'm going to bring that sky all the way through down to the horizon, because the cactus are going to be a darker value than the sky, so I can just paint through it. I'll just mix up a nice basic sky, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, the rest of the sky is going to be kind of a gray color. To indicate those wispy clouds. And I can just throw some burnt umber right into that blue mixture to start. Then I'll just add some ultramarine blue to that to make it a little cooler. Something like that will probably work. Maybe a little warmer than that, so get some of that burnt umber back in. It's just going back and forth until you find the right color. Painting right through the cactus. Don't need to worry about painting around these. basic, just a very subtle semi-cloudy sky. I'm probably not going to do too much more than that. I'm kind of just moving my brush in a semicircle here and there to indicate some of those wispy clouds. That'll do it for the sky. Simple as that. Now I need to start dropping in the color for these rock outcrops. So we're going to use some warmer colors for that, some burnt sienna, more raw umber. I'll drop some orange off to the side. I'll grab some of that later. And we'll just continue the wash where we left off on the sky. Let the color of the rocks bleed up into the sky a little bit. It'll create a really interesting glowing effect that I just really love. Painting right through that cactus. Grab some of that orange. Add a few spots of just nice bright orange here and there. Mix that burnt umber into that gray color on the palette to change the color up a little bit. I'll throw some reds in there too, why not? All kinds of different interesting colors that we can just play with in this wash, in this stage where everything is flowing and very loose and impressionistic. I'm not worrying about painting any tight shapes right now. This is all about just getting color on the paper and setting the stage for what comes next, which is the middle values and then the darks. Don't need to worry about being precise with anything in this phase of the painting. And because the paper is quite wet, and because I've wet it down on both sides, it's going to stay like this for a lot longer than it usually would if you just wet down one side, and that allows me more time to work in this wet into wet phase. So I don't have to be in a rush. Just drop in like a greenish color for this foliage right here. Same for this. And we'll come back later and actually define some of the branches and things in there. Start hinting at some of that green for this Palo Verde right here too. Paint these mountains back on the horizon with some cobalt blue. And looks like we are just about done with the first wash. Now, in order to start the second wash, I need this to be basically completely dry, because the second wash I need the shapes to be tight and I need the paint to stay put on the paper. If the paper's wet, the paint is going to fuzz and you'll get soft edges, which in this phase is exactly what I want. But for the next phase I need the paint to not move around so much. So I need to let this paper dry, and I'll be right back. Well, that should be dry enough. So let's see, where am I going to start? This middle value shape, I think I'm going to start right here with this saguaro cactus. So I need to mix up a nice green color for that. I'll just throw this cobalt blue right into all of these colors that are already on the palette. It'll make it a richer, more interesting green. Drop some cadmium yellow into that. Just keep adding yellow until it looks how I want it. These cactus have more of a dusty, earthy green to them. Should be about right. So I'm making sure I have enough water on my brush so that the paint will flow how I want it to. If there's not enough water on your brush, you'll run out of paint really fast and you'll get really frustrated. At least I did and do. Yeah, something like that'll be good. Paper's still a little tiny bit damp, but that's alright. So the edges of this shape will be just a bit fuzzy, but not the end of the world. And at this point, I've got my value study as a roadmap that I can follow. I'm just painting the exact same shape that I already did, except now I'm using color. So the green of that saguaro is going to touch right into the shadow, the cast shadow on the rock from the cactus. So I'm gonna mix up a shadow color. It's just cobalt blue and burnt umber. Makes a nice dark gray. So I'm touching into the green of that cactus. I want this shape to all flow and connect. And there's going to be these little gradients from one color to the next, all within this connected shape. And it's just so beautiful. It's one of my favorite parts of watercolors, making those big shapes and watching how everything flows and connects with itself. It's very, very satisfying. No other medium can do that so effortlessly. All you do is you put the paint on the paper and it blends itself together. Water wants to flow. Just painting in some of the little textures in the rock here and there. And I'll go back once everything is more done and I'll add even more texture to the rocks where it looks like it needs it. Same with right there, just touching the paint to the shape of the cactus and letting it flow and bleed into itself. Trying to loosely indicate some of the little shadow areas and the crevices of these rocks without getting carried away and trying to paint every little detail. So we're gonna step away from the rocks for a moment paint this little Palo Verde tree right here. I'm going to liven up this green with some more cadmium yellow. Touch that into the cactus. Now for this, I'm going to try something. I want to try dry brushing. Let's see. This big brush might actually work better for this. Splay it out like that. And you just kind of drag it along the paper. These Palo Verdes have kind of a wispy look to them, and it's always something that I struggle to capture in a way that I'm happy with. So I'm trying to see if I can improve that with this. I always struggle to paint wispy trees that are very spindly and they don't have much, like their leaves aren't very dense. Because Palo Verdes have teeny tiny little leaves. They're very, very small leaves. Many desert plants are like that. The small leaves help dissipate heat more effectively. Yeah, something like that. That looks a little better. And I think I might come back in with gouache later, and if you look at the photo, there's these really bright little sticks that you can see. And I will either use gouache or I will scratch that out with my fingernail. It just depends on how things look. So, dropping in some of the shadow area down here. Sometimes I like to make my shadows especially blue, like exaggerate the blue of the shadow. It makes it more lively and vibrant, I've found. And this is literally just exactly what's in my value study. It's no different at all so far. The shape is the same. I mean, I'm being a little more careful with the shape at this stage, but it's pretty much the same shape. Let me see. Where's my spray bottle? I want to try something a little risky. I wasn't quite happy with how that was blooming out to the side like that, so I might just lean into that and make it more obvious. Let the paint run a little bit. Yeah, we'll see what that does. So just painting more of these shadow areas here, doing some dry brushing, getting that nice texture. Dry brushing is a lot easier if you use paper that has a little bit of texture to it, like this Arches cold press paper does. I do not like to paint on smooth paper for this exact reason. Touch the shadow right there into the tree shape. a lot of like small details going on right here. Some smaller rocks, so I'm just kind of loosely indicating those shapes, trying not to get carried away. So I'm painting around the highlights of these rocks. So the shadow side of this rock helps define the highlighted side of this rock. Add a little shadow there, and we can pop out that edge of the rock too. I'll work up into the shadow side of this big rock outcrop. And those colors that I laid down in the first wash are going to show through this wash because watercolor is a transparent medium. So the colors that are underneath will show through the darker colors that you put over top of it. Just finding little ways to connect the shape any way that I can, even if I have to kind of invent something that's not actually in the photo. Because it's just a reference photo. You don't have to copy it exactly. So the area where I took this picture it's about 20 minutes from my house out in the desert. And this is a good time to talk about painting what you know, what you're familiar with, painting what you have a very intimate connection to. Because sometimes we think, oh, we have to travel to these exotic locations and all that kind of stuff in order to make good paintings, but some of the best scenes are the ones that are very close to home. Just paint what you know, what you love, the things that you see all the time. Try to find the magic in those things you're super familiar with. There's nothing wrong with traveling to amazing places and painting those things as well, but don't feel like that's what you have to do in order to make good paintings. So we'll start painting a saguaro here. Just touch the green right into that shadow. Trying to paint as much of it as I can with just one brush stroke. That helps things stay fresh looking. Fresh and spontaneous. Drop some green back into this one here too, darken it up. And this goes into this foliage right here. A little wispy Palo Verde tree action. Drop in some darks towards the bottom while it's still wet. This saguaro back here. Make it more blue. That'll push it further back in the seam. So I can scratch out a few light branches here with the edge of my fingernail. And just about ready to start working in some of the darks. Just going to start darkening up some of these rocks here and there. So I'll mix up some really dark colors here so that I can add some more details in the shadow sides of these rocks. And I'm going to do that while things are still damp. That'll soften up these shapes a little bit. Make them slightly more undefined. Again, it's basically what I did in my value study, just slightly more detail. It's important to not get carried away with your darks. If you add too many darks in too many places, you'll end up killing your light, and then you'll lose the impact of that contrast between light and dark. Every once in a while I'll tilt my head back and I'll kind of squint, make sure that the scene as a whole is coming together. It can be really easy to get caught just staring really close at the particular area you're working on and lose sight of the whole picture. I need the cactus to be very dry before I add the details onto that. Just adding in some of these branches, just a few. It's dry enough now, so we can start adding in some of these details in the saguaros. Really tighten up and define the edges a little more. Just very loosely indicating the texture of those ridges on the outside. Very distinctive characteristic of these cactus. Okay, I need this to completely dry again, and then I'm going to work in some highlights with gouache. So I'll be right back. So I've got my liner brush. I'm just going to get some gouache straight from the tube. Gouache is very thick, so I need it to be wet enough for it to flow. Just a few branches I want to drop in. Some random dead grass here and there. Just little tiny details that'll bring the scene more to life. And then what I really want to do is add some highlights on the ridges of this cactus, just here and there. Do a little tapping, just add some sparkle here and there. Okay, I think we are going to call that a finished painting. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and I hope you learned something. And I hope to see you on the next one.